without any doubt, the last time we had CO2 as high as today was 14 million years ago. And that's before we had Antarctica. That's before we had the Greenland ice sheet. It's a very different world. And then juxtapose that with humans evolved at a CO2 levels of 190, 200 parts per million. They've never saw anything higher than 290 parts per million. We're at 425 parts per million.
The numbers surrounding climate change are real, and they are frightening, and they leave us with very, very few options. We can either warm, no pun intended, to the idea of extreme weather events that increase in both frequency and intensity, rising sea levels, severe droughts and wildfires, ocean acidification, and general disruption of the ecosystems that supported our evolution, or we can take action to slow and hopefully even reverse the impact of carbon and methane in our atmosphere. Today we are joined by Isabel Montanez, a sedimentary geochemist and paleoclimatologist who says that the lessons we are learning from the Earth itself, when accelerated, may help us to radically and rapidly sidestep our own extinction. Stay tuned for what may be one of the most important and inspiring messages you've heard in a long, long time. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
You have a really interesting job, and I'm not going to get too far ahead of myself here, but I think your job may have become more interesting than you originally bargained for, right?
Yeah.
What is your background?
So my background is I'm a geologist, really in training, and a little more on the chemical side of things. And I stayed in that realm in terms of looking at past climates of different time periods and doing field work, and loved that part. Traveled the world, thought I was, reconstructing all these past times when exciting things happen. And then I became director of the Institute of the Environment here, and met some people that, fundamentally changed how I do things. A real pivot. Pointed out that my expertise could be really important in sort of a new venture, a new initiative that's now global, and that's the enhanced rock weathering. So I never thought that I would see my basic science actually translated to applied science.
So, and before we jump too far ahead into the rock weathering, which is fascinating, believe me, you out there listening to this, you are about to get schooled in the best way possible. But I want to go back and let's talk about observations, like how you can look at rocks and tell what the climate was like.
Yep.
Historically. How?
Yeah. So many different ways. I think it all comes down to really that we can now look at, we say isotopes, the different isotopes of any element, almost the entire periodic table. And what that means is that certain processes on Earth might impact a certain element and how its isotopes are distributed in the ocean, in the air, in plants. Another process will do another isotope. We used to be limited, but now we can do a whole range of isotopes. So I can go back, I can look at rocks that formed in the ocean, I can look at rocks that formed as soils, and I can look at ancient plant materials that are fossilized and see what they were, what the weather was like, in a sense what the seasonality was like, how much annual rainfall there was, what the temperatures in the atmosphere were, what was driving that, like CO2 in the atmosphere. I can look and see what sea level was like, and which will tell me something about how much ice there was, and the list goes on. But that's and then the other thing is we can put ages on rocks now, really precise ages, so we can go around the world and compare apples to apples, and that makes for a whole new revelation.
So carbon dating, right? The
No.
decay of isotopes? Or
no, so carbon dating is only good to about 60,000 years, and it's good, but it's not precise enough. So believe it or not, it's a mineral called a zircon that it's been forming on the Earth. In fact, the oldest organic matter ever found on Earth, as well as the oldest rocks, the first rocks that ever formed, were all dated by zircons. They were actually the mineral zircon. It's something that forms deep in the mantle of the Earth and comes out with volcanoes, and it's precisely datable using uranium isotopes and their daughter products, lead, thorium, any time period. And that's what we use. Because I can go back tens of thousands of years and say to you plus or minus 1 or 2 years, which is pretty amazing, right?
Yeah, it's beyond my capabilities. So
yeah,
I'm always amazed by stuff like that.
Yeah.
When you look at these the trends that you are mapping through this process, are they correlative or consistent with what other sources might reveal? Like like the ice core samples that we'll talk about, like how much carbon was in the atmosphere. Do they align?
Yeah. So yes, and a very on the first order scale, right? Ice cores, at least for the first 100,000 years or so, they give you yearly records. That's hard to get in the ancient. But after you get past a few 100,000 years, yes, you might not be able to say this is precisely 100,001 years. But the general trends hold, and that is when CO2 is low, temperatures are lower around the globe, and there's more ice, and sea level is overall lower, and vice versa. When CO2 goes up, for natural reasons or not natural reasons, the temperatures are quite a bit warmer, sometimes double what they were when the CO2 was naturally very low. And of course, the ice melts, sea level goes up, and so on.
So you have this really accurate snapshot of historical climate patterns. When you look at our current situation, how do we fare against what has happened when humans roamed the earth? Let's just narrow the time frame down to that epoch.
So we don't compare well. Some work that was done just a few years ago by a worldwide consortium, one that I actually lead now, but I was not at the time. They looked at the past 60 million years, lots and lots of data of what CO2 was like, reconstructed using all kinds of approaches. And what they showed is, without any doubt, the last time we had CO2 as high as today was 14 million years ago. And that's before we had Antarctica. That's before we had the Greenland ice sheet. It's a very different world. And then juxtapose that with humans evolved at a CO2 levels of 190, 200 parts per million. They've never saw anything higher than 290 parts per million. We're at 425 parts per million. So there's nothing comparable. And then lastly, the rates at which CO2 has risen in the last 70, 75 years is just an order to 2 orders of magnitude faster than it's ever risen in the past, sometimes 3 orders of magnitude faster.
Wow. And so that's really sad.
Yeah.
That hurts my heart. Thank you.
You look like some of my students. It seems like every time I meet with them, oh, here she goes, doom and gloom.
Oh, you know what? I would not. I envy them. I envy them because they have a chance to make real change where I don't know that we didn't have the full picture. So at least they know what they're in for. There's a famous scene in The Right Stuff. Have you ever seen that movie?
Yeah.
That talks about the Mars or the Apollo astronauts. And there's a scene when John Glenn is up and he doesn't know if his shields are going to deploy and he's going to be able to return. And Scott Glenn, the character who plays, I think, I can't remember the character he played, but the scientists are like, what do we tell him? What do we tell him? And Scott Glenn's like, he's a pilot. You tell him the condition of his craft. And it was just like such a, oh yeah, okay. I think this generation is that. They are the Scott Glenn / the people in trouble who just want to know the truth.
Yeah.
And all we can do is, that's I think the lowest service we can offer them. So thank you because you're not only sharing these truths with them, this data that's out there, but you're actually giving them insights into how it could be fixed. And let's get into that, because I think the weathering is just crazy cool. I had never heard of it until I read about your work. So first, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What is weathering? How did we discover it?
So, we have long known, for probably 100 years ago, that one of Earth's most powerful reactions, naturally, once it had water, is to take that water out of the atmosphere, the water vapor, and mix it with the CO2 in the atmosphere. And that can also happen in soils where you have plants and they respire CO2 into the soil. Microbes make CO2 when they chomp on stuff in the soil. And then there's soil water from the rain, right? So in both cases, whether it's happening in the atmosphere or whether it's in the soil, it makes an acid, carbonic acid. It's the same thing that's in our stomachs right now. It's what's in a can of Coke when you open it up and it goes flat. Well, it was probably a carbonic acid. It had a pH of 4 or 3, and it degasses and it becomes neutral. So a natural process goes on all the time around the world. Any rock, any soil, any gravel, any sand is always undergoing this. It's just incredibly slow. It's geologically, on a geologic scale, thousands of years, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. But here's the thing. It has always fixed the climate change in the past. It is the way that the Earth goes back to its more stable state of being cooler and having ice sheets. And we've not long known this, but what we haven't known until really the last 3 decades or so, because we didn't have a way to figure it out, is how has it influenced CO2 in the atmosphere naturally as long as we've had life on the planet. And so now, by many different approaches, we've reconstructed atmospheric CO2 through time. And it's a very, very clear message that this very powerful reaction can bring CO2 low under certain circumstances, and it can return us to what we call an ice house, where we have ice sheets and things, and it's cool. Very different life forms in terms of ecosystems. And the flip side of that, when there's lots of volcanism, then of course there's lots of CO2 in the atmosphere, and it'll fix the reaction will fix things again, but it takes a long time. But what we also learned is that it's a certain type of rock. So today, where most of this happens is in Indonesia, because it's full of volcanic lava. We call it basalt, but tons and tons of iron and magnesium-rich rocks, silicate rocks we call them. They're exposed in the tropics, lots of rain, it's warm, and they're weathering like mad. So much of it happening now on Earth is there. So times in the past, for instance, one time period we're really interested in, 300 million years ago, was the only time we had CO2 as low as today, as the last maybe 3, 4, 5 million years. It was because the continents had come together. Africa sutured with North America, and it was all one big continent. And you had 60,000 kilometers of Himalayan scale mountains exposed to this weathering and full of these volcanic rocks. So you weathered like mad, and that must be why CO2 was so low. And then when that was done, there was nothing really powerful left to keep CO2 low. Volcanism started, and it went right up to where the dinosaurs flourished. So we learned this, many, many examples of this around the world. We know that's what's controlled the state of climate on this planet since we've had water, and we know it's what makes it a habitable planet, unlike Mars or Venus.
So I'm going to restate it so I'm sure that I am understanding what you're saying. So water hits carbon, very passive.
It dissolves it. It literally dissolves with it.
Right. So, and it's a very passive chemical process that the runoff of which carries the carbon away, and it becomes part of a substrate, or like it lives there until it doesn't. Yeah.
That's a really thank you for bringing that up. So the CO2 mixes with water. It's now an acid, but that acid isn't stable on Earth's surface conditions. Water, that we drink, ocean, it's all in the neutral pHs generally, right? And so this acid is not stable in that. So it breaks down naturally into an inert middle form that is very dissolvable in water. It doesn't degas, and it can flow all the way to the ocean. Ultimately, that's the goal. Is that if this gets to the ocean, like in the past, then shells will make their or reefs will make their calcium carbonate shells out of this passive inert molecule. And then that CO2 that was once in the atmosphere is locked away as new rock or on the seafloor for potentially millions of years. And that's what we believe has been happening on this planet to maintain its reasonable temperatures and correct for past climate changes and making it habitable.
So that's been the cycle, and you can observe it. You can track the effects of it because you're looking at global climate, and global CO2 concentrations through the history of rock. That the rock is telling you what the time was like, and it's very accurate, more so than ice core samples, et cetera, to a certain point. The fascinating part, the thing that blows me away, is it's a natural process, like you said. The Earth does this on its own. It is, however, incredibly slow.
Yes.
And
yep.
With the rate that you mentioned that we were at 420 parts per million?
425.
425 parts per million. I remember when we broke 400, everybody was like, oh, clock's ticking. We got to do something. And here we sit, still having really not done anything. Well, in the United States, I think other countries are aggressively trying to make this right. But the thing that I want to touch on is there is a way to expedite this, right?
That's right.
And you had mentioned basalt rock crushing it, try to speed up this process and exposing that to carbon and letting it kind of sequester the carbon and carry it away to someplace safe?
Right. So I'd say, probably about 10 years ago, there were all kinds of new things coming on board. Some of them natural-based. This is nature-based, right? Others are engineered, machines that suck CO2 out of the atmosphere. And I do want to say up front, you said earlier about this generation, they will fix it. All those fixes exist. Mm-hmm. It's just that we need to commit to them. And a couple of years ago, we were committed. The Inflation Reduction Act put billions, hundreds of billions into, in part, this kind of thing. And then since then, industries and foundations have too. So what is it? It took people like me, these kind of nerdy basic scientists that would never imagine they would get involved in translating to applied. Gosh, that's a dirty word in our communities. But we're carbon cycle geochemists. We're reconstructing what's happened to CO2, carbon in the past, right? It took people like us that actually truly, through transdisciplinary approaches, got together with soil scientists and agronomists, and who were committed to really learning from one another, not just working together. So that first started in the UK around 2018, 16. It looked very promising, and then it's just exploded in the last 6, 7, 8 years. So now what's going on is people realized if you took basalt from quarries, we've even tested roof tiles. The sand on composite roofs? Mm-hmm. Well, when they make those, they're left with a lot of little, very fine sand that won't stick to the roof tiles. And it's made of basalt. And so we've even tried that in fields. And so you get your lava, could be in Indonesia, it's right there, it's exposed all over the surface of the land. You grind it up to very fine sand. So, not playground sand, but even a little bit finer. And the whole idea behind this is that you create a lot of surface area. A rock of a kilo of rock will have a certain amount of surface area. But if you take that kilo and you grind it up into this fine sand, you may have several orders of magnitude more surface area. When that sees that carbonic acid that's formed in the soil, it's going to dissolve. And it dissolves at a much accelerated rate. So everybody had this in mind. They've tried it in labs, in sort of big test tubes and little plots, and it looked promising. At this point, many of us, including us here, we're running the California trials. We're doing it now on farm fields and on ranch lands and grasslands, irrigated pasture, at the scale of now hectares, not just meters or in the lab, and with cows on it and with crops on it. You literally just till in this green fine sand in the top surface, the maybe 10 centimeters, 15 centimeters of the soil. When you're planting, you put in seeds, if it's grass, and then things grow. And it's irrigated in many cases in California. Sometimes it's natural if it's in the Midwest, or in other places. And then you let it do its thing. And what we see is that literally, I'll give you the best scenario. We have a site in the Sierra Nevada foothills near Yuba City, and we irrigate, or they irrigate every couple of weeks. Well, we go up and we look and see what the waters are like coming out when they drain from the field. We can even see action in 2 weeks between events because everything that's dissolved has been flushed out at the chemicals, and then we see the next 2 weeks and it's starting again. It's incredibly rapid. So what people have shown is that it has the potential to take 5, some have even suggested 9 billion tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere per year. That's a sixth to close to a fourth of, actually a third of all the CO2 we put into the atmosphere each year. So just this approach could potentially, have huge impact, and that's why there's so much activity around it.
So that could wind our clock back a bit, but we're still talking about we're still having 2/3 that are still living out there. Does that? So less is progress, sure. Is it enough though? Like, when do you see? If this mechanism, this weathering mechanism, was left to its own devices, how long would it be till we could return to a place where we could breathe?
Right.
And I mean breathe like, we're not going to die tomorrow, or the planet will sustain human life a little bit.
We'd like to get probably to about 360 parts per million. It's not that far, back, and so it's people have modeled this for the future, and it's going to depend, of course, on how quickly we start reducing the fossil fuel emissions, right? That we start going more and more to green energy, and if we were to do that quicker, sooner than later, then of course this could have very big impact, because it, along with some other approaches that are out there, could take care of all the extra in the atmosphere. They could bring us back to 360, probably in 20, 30 years maximum, maybe even in a decade. That said, if we continue on the trajectory we are on, or with new regulations, even worse trajectory, we would have to also use things like technologies, machines that can actually suck out CO2 from the atmosphere. Some of them are using very similar approaches, by the way. It's just a machine. Those machines are fossil fuel driven, right? But they're very powerful, and some could be driven by potentially solar, wind. So there's all kinds of things that were coming out around the world and being tried and tested and shown to work, and some actually starting to be scaled. And then we stopped.
Yeah, and that is a cotton picking shame. But I mean, I think the fact that kind of progress could be made is eye opening, because most of us are like, it's over. Like I don't know. I've come across people who are like praying for asteroids to wipe us out before. Like it's just like just stop the pain kind of a thing. So for your students, for that generation, I really I'm grateful that they're here now, because they do seem to have the ability to ignore the political will,
they do.
and drive that conversation where it needs to go. And I've also seen, I mean, I like to look at different chess pieces, and I don't profess to be an expert on climate change or anything like that, but I pay enough attention that I can create a tapestry of things, and I see a lot of positive movement going on in other countries. Like China is absolutely crushing EVs and battery storage and their technology. I think Australia hit parity a while ago. I think they are like in the 90%, 90% green energy supply now. So those models are everywhere, and like different countries are opening their trade gates so that they can import Chinese EVs and do so effectively. this partnership is going on whether we climb aboard or not. So the fact that that's in motion, that we're slowly phasing out this era where we want to cling to the more expensive premise of pumping fossil fuels, into our veins and letting the emissions go where they're going to go, and just calling the whole thing a hoax. The world's walking away from that. This kind of technology is, I think, another arrow in the quiver. We had Tessa Hill on a while ago who was talking about the low-hanging fruit opportunity of reducing methane emissions. Not only reducing methane emissions, but reducing the impact of methane in the atmosphere, because apparently it's got like a much quicker shelf life. It doesn't stay in the atmosphere much longer. It is much heavier, but once we get rid of that, so I mean, I look at all these things and I'm thinking that's really cool. So give me more things to fall asleep and dream about tonight. I want to get more specifics into the agriculture implications of this. So first, let me dismiss my inner naysayer and say, what does this do to the quality of the water? Does this have a negative impact at all?
Right. Well, some would argue it actually may be make for a filtering of water in soils. But you might be asking about water that we drink, like in groundwater or surface waters. So it should not have any impact negatively, but of course, a lot of heavy metals and toxic metals, nickel, chromium, especially chromium, can be found in these lava rocks or basalt. So one of the first things that is required before you even grind or anything, is that that you do a really comprehensive and very quantitative analysis of those elements. And if it shows anything even close, not even close, but like an order of magnitude less than what the government regulations are for what would be in water, you can't use it. So, but it turns out that's not really a problem. There's not many that have any issues. You just have to be selective. The reason that it could be a really good thing, and California is a great example. A few years ago, the SIGMA Act was, or the SIGMA, I guess A is for Act, was passed, and that is the issue that for us in climate change, water availability is our primary issue. It's not really warming. Wildfires are obviously terrible, but water is really what's going to be the issue for us. And so the idea was that, are we going to have to decommission maybe 1 million acres of land in California because we can't afford to use the water for agriculture? Farmers and ranchers and others are panicking over this. The last thing they want to worry about is spreading basalt on their fields. But what we're realizing is it changes the structure of the soil. It makes it actually better at infiltrating water and possibly not only passing that water from the atmosphere, rain, irrigation, down further into the groundwater, which we can pump up to drink, but it might actually be filtering it as well, because it changes literally the physical structure. The soil aggregates better, and that's really important. There's another side benefit of that aggregation. It holds on to its own organic carbon better. It likes those little pods. I mean, these are micropods. Holds on to the things that died, the roots, microbes, and it protects it. And it doesn't decay and become more CO2 to the atmosphere. And so it's a double whammy. So it looks like you get 2 bangs for your buck. You get your water SIGMA Act addressing that, and you're also sequestering carbon at the same time.
So even if they do commission those, is it a done deal? Have they decommissioned, or are they still?
No, it's probably within. They I think they were talking 2030, 27, but I wouldn't be able to say much beyond that. I think it's a projection. Is this where we could be?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's still time to consider the implications of weathering, and the fact that it's almost like let the water do the work, because the water will eventually get us out of the situation that's making the water scarce.
Yeah. And I mean, California's doing this is outside of my bailiwick, but California is the lead in this country really for something called managed aquifer renewal, trying to figure out how to take these atmospheric rivers that flood our fields, get that to drain into the groundwater so we can use it later. storage, literally. So yeah, I think we have a lot going, and that gets back to your comment about, do you sort of give it up? Do we want the asteroid to hit? 5 years ago, I might have laughed and then said, yeah, I feel the same way. But I am incredibly hopeful. So much has come on board. There's a hiccup going on now. But like you said, the rest of the world is saying, we know what we need to do. Sooner than later, we will pivot back. And we may pivot back stronger because a lot of this research and development is going on. And people aren't giving up. And then we're ready to hit the ground running. So I do think we can change things really pretty well, even if we keep burning fossil fuels.
That's wonderful. And that's important. Unlike me, and I applaud your tenacity because I tend to go to fetal position and seek comfort from something. I don't know, any level of distraction. Pink Floyd is a good one sometimes because it's just nihilistic. So anyway, it just rhymes with my vibe. That's really cool. So I want to point out something that it's not any rock, right? There are rocks that if you were to treat like basalt, you would actually end up doing more harm because you would release CO2 into the atmosphere. Is that accurate?
Not the rock itself. So actually, it's interesting that you bring this up. In this country, and I think also, at least in the UK, I don't know about elsewhere. Actually, I know in South America as well. They've been liming for a century. And what that is effectively a rock, calcium carbonate. They grind it up, and they alter it a bit, but they've been putting that on soils. The Mississippi River Valley, you can actually see the fingerprints of that down in the Gulf Coast, along with the nitrogen fertilizer fingerprint. But they've been doing this because soils are very rarely naturally pH sort of neutral. A lot of soils are acidic around the world, and that's not ideal. Even if the plants like it, they can't absorb the maximum amount of micronutrients until it's a neutral pH. So the cheap solution has been farmers get somebody to come out, they analyze their soil, see what the soil pH is, and a couple of other measurements, and they say, okay, this is how much lime you need. We'll grind it up, and you'll till it in. That works. That actually also takes out CO2. The problem is you lose 50% of the impact because you actually let off some CO2 as well. So it works. It's not ideal. It doesn't usually have any bad metals or things like that. So there's really not any necessarily bad rock. It's how efficient it is. So the cool thing is, again, in the background, just in the last year, there's a company out there that looking like they're growing really well, making synthetic lava rock basalt that is really reactive, like 10 times more than any others. Wow. And maybe that's going to be the solution. Maybe, but if they are doing it, 100 other startups are doing something, right? And a few will survive, and that might be the next step.
That's a really interesting segue into some place I was really hoping we could go, which is corporate interest in this entire. There's a lot of investment out there in this field, is there not?
There is, and there's some leaders, and I think it's certainly out in the open that Microsoft, the Frontier Group, that I believe includes Stripe and some others, Google. And then foundations, some very large foundations who have really committed to decarbonization. Microsoft's a leader. They're in the news for that. They may be pulling back a bit. It's not clear whether it's AI data center focus pivot or whether it's there's not much pressure to have to do this right now because all these very big corporations aren't going to have a carbon removal plan like they would have had if things had stayed the same. But they're still invested. They're still quite invested. To the point, for instance, where this enhanced rock weathering will pretty much be on most continents, if not all, by 3 to 5 years from now, in terms of test trials as well as scaled up to tens, hundreds of thousands of acres.
And when you earlier were projecting what the impact of this could be. Were you imagining that scale of like available, like this is the farmland that's out there, and if we treated this, if we applied this technique throughout all the agricultural spaces in the world, that's what the end result would be?
So people modeled that. A few had the audacity to suggest it. The few that had started early, lots of skeptics. There still are many, many skeptics. But it's amazing how, in 2020, there were already trials in California. And quite a few, actually. I think 26, all in every type of soil system and agricultural system and landscape climate of California. But even just then, we're not talking much 6 years, not even 6 years fully. They were very first step trials, lots of missteps, not very much synchronicity between them, not fully investigated or verified, all kinds of things. And just in that time, since then, around the world, similar things have been going on. We've learned so much that now we're an order of magnitude, if not two, ahead of where this community was. And now it's a global community, quite synchronized. That's really important because that adds, I think, a lot to accelerating. And it's amazing. I've never seen, most academics would never have seen any science go at this rate. There's a little cost. And that is sometimes the desire to scale up and commercialize, make markets, maybe for the better good of everyone, but still to make a carbon market to sell for profit, sometimes outpaces the research and development. And that's kind of a bit what's happening right now. Lots of questions still, and but we'll see. It's an exciting time because I think the next 3 to 5 years are really going to play out one way or another.
If you were to plan based on the trajectories that you see, the current momentum, it sounds like more people are embracing this over time. So which that has a tendency to eat away at political will, because that political will is really based on what I think that people might believe. I could tell them something and if they buy it, we're safe. This is pressure coming from the people who are going to be producing the food that keeps us alive, and the water supply. It could save the water supply. Let me break away real quickly, because I just opened my eyes to a new question, which is what impact does it have on agriculture? Is there a downside? If I'm a farmer and you're like, put this stuff on your ground, and is it just, to me, it's transparent? Is it going to improve the quality or the frequency of my crops, or does it have an impact on that end?
So there's been a lot of studies. Everybody's made sure to measure their crop yields, their forage quality. Now they're measuring, for instance, depth of roots. So quantity and quality in terms of micronutrients, whether it's a crop or forage for animals. And in most cases, it is only a positive thing. Many more micronutrients, higher crop yields. Not always, but never lower crop yields. I don't think anyone has shown that yet. And just last week, I learned that in one of our sites, the roots in the irrigated pasture in the amended plot, the acres that are amended versus the control to compare to, are double in depth and volume or mass than in the control plot. So clearly, grasses and wild weeds basically are very, very happy with these micronutrients, and we are keeping the pH neutral, and which is when you maximize your micronutrients.
And so micronutrients, does that translate into a more nutritional agricultural product? So if I'm growing a potato, let's just say, if this technology takes hold and I'm using this technique on my farm, my potato is going to actually sustain me longer now than it would beforehand.
Yes and no. We as humans have domesticated potatoes to be starchy, so they're not that good for us anyway. We've actually reduced the nutrients in them. But the real answer is that things like calcium, magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, iron, things that we really do need, silica, and there are others, but those are the key. We need those, sodium. That's what the plant takes up. That's their micronutrients. And they like it best when that soil is neutral. And so, yes, and we take supplements for that. If we ate enough of our foods that were rich enough in that, we wouldn't be taking supplements and we wouldn't have deficiencies.
That's fascinating. So, okay, I'm looking for a downside. I can understand why there's a growing wave of support behind this, especially from the ag community. Have they spoken up?
So there are lots of players. I mean, especially the big scale deployments are all involved with farmers, often consortia of farmers. They're pretty happy because they're actually seeing cost benefits, right? They're not seeing negative components yet. I think the biggest, so there's the downside beyond the fact that we're still discovering in the research and development side, and I'll say about what that means. The downside is that that's moving more slowly, the full understanding, than the application. And there's not a lot of patience sometimes for, we need to see how this plays out in the next 6 months or a year. And some of the downsides. So the main thing that's going on now is two things that we just don't fully yet know. So we can't say, is it going to be a good thing? One is that soils are complex. It's kind of like a car. We know what we put on the hood of the car or just beneath the hood, and we know what comes out the bottom if it's draining or leaking. But what's going on under that hood between those two, in and out, can be really complex, right? And that's what these soil systems, they have lots and lots of minerals in there and organic matter that can hold on to cations, like on metals and calcium and magnesium and aluminum, and they can make minerals. They can dissolve minerals. All of this actually then impacts how much of the weathering of that rock will really translate to removal of CO2. Because it can weather like mad, but if I take the weathering products, that inert carbon has to be balanced. Every molecule of the inert carbon needs to be balanced by calcium or magnesium. If I'm stealing the calcium and the magnesium, I'm putting it in a mineral or sticking it onto some organic matter, that inert carbon is just going to become CO2 again. And so you don't want to be losing those cations, we call them. It's the nutrients, basically. We want to make sure they come out of the field and they go in the groundwater or to streams, and then eventually will go to rivers and go to the ocean. Because there, then you can have those shells and reefs and everything take up that material and lock it away. You also can help fix ocean acidification, right? Because this is like Alka-Seltzer, effectively, right? It's neutralizer. So that's one thing, and that's a really biggie. So right now the solution is kind of not very visionary, but it's safe. As you can imagine, companies are saying, I'm not investing $150 million in this if you can't tell me I'm going to get this stuff out in this many days or months. And so they're going very conservative with soils that are very sandy, little organic matter, no slopes, everything just perfect. That's limiting. So Brazil is perfect. Right now, the biggest scaling region is Brazil. And parts of Asia. Parts of Africa may have some promise. And the mid-continent, because it's corn, it's pretty uniform soils. It works, but we also know there are many, many more soils that could be used and that might help their health and the water quality, like we talked about, and the water storage. We just need the time to figure it all out. And the other thing is that there's organic matter in all of these, and there's lots and lots of microbes, fungi, and there are many different ecosystems. They can either interact with these released weathering products in a good way, synergistically, or it could be antagonistically. And if they do it antagonistically, it could be worse. We could release more CO2 than we took out. If they do it in a good way, synergistically, they could actually help us take not just sequester that atmospheric CO2, but also sequester the organic carbon in the soil. A double, double payment for, to bang for your buck. But we need a lot of work around the world. That's what everybody's saying is we need more time. Give us more time.
And I imagine the investment, the investment required to support all this work, all this exploration, is at the hands of very nervous people who feel like this is time sensitive, and yet what you're doing is you're taking an existing process that has I'm going to dare to say laid the foundation for life on this planet to succeed, and you're speeding it up, and they're saying faster.
Yeah, or they're saying simpler. We hear a lot of all of us end up interacting a lot with for-profit, non-profit, and then large industry. And investment, hedge fund groups that are investing. And they want the simple, is it working or is it not? And are we getting this much or not? And that's not realistic. And so they're pushing for people to use models. Just model it. See what it says it might do. We're not there yet. And that's the thing. We're getting there fast. And I think something that's worth pointing out is I've never seen scientific community actually come together the way this community has. Now, I'm sure there are others in the health sciences, in engineering and all, but there are academics, for instance, in this country are actually starting a group with bylaws, that have passed lawyers that would make them a coordinated voice for the U.S. for companies to contact. And you contact one, you're contacting all of us. It's interesting. We'll see, but it's a brilliant idea if it works, because then you're not trying to get there first versus me. Your $1 million is not as good as my $2 million. It's a collective billion and all the intellectual resources with that and their experience. So that's what's happening. And there's a couple of foundations that are trying to be the global coordinator of both those who are the practitioners, the developers, and then those who are buying the credits.
What you just described makes such perfect sense, and I'm grateful that there are minds out there that think that way, rather than rush in or open it up. There's like a land grab, like who wants to own this technology or something like that. No. The technology belongs to nature. We are taking it and we're modeling it, but we want to make sure that we are not creating a Frankensteinian kind of a vibe out there by misdoing. But in our haste, we could be creating a worse situation. So I think that's pretty wonderful. But I have to say that I am going through my mind and I'm thinking if this reduces ocean acidification, that preserves the fish population, maybe gives them a chance to buoy back, which is a tremendous source of protein, which can offset our dependency on cattle farming, which is one of our biggest methane. That's what introduces more methane into the atmosphere than a lot of other things. So I don't see a downside to this, other than I wish it would happen quicker. But so when you're sitting on the front lines, do you ever have that feeling like, I wish we had more information now?
So I get frustrated with stop pushing us. I can't give you that answer. Don't pull out yet of this commitment because you just give us 6 more months. Sure. But no, I actually amazed. So someone did someone out there actually keeps a Google Doc, a Google Sheet online that the world has access to, of all papers and all policy pieces, opinion pieces, everything that's coming out in the world on this topic. And they started this maybe 3-4 years ago. There were probably 100 some academic publications, but open to the public and to anyone else. To the public and to academics and to the companies. I think it's at 2,500 or 3,000 now. We're talking like 3 to 4 years. It is just amazing how it has just exploded in a good way. So there's just too much intellectual investment already to say, to worry about that. I just think we all would like to see that be appreciated for we're almost there. Give us a chance to really hone in on these couple of things I mentioned and get you a better delivery and more efficient and more effective. I think what's happening now, there's a new initiative that was just announced, for instance, in the U.S. on Tuesday. But I was in a position to be able to see that develop. they put out a call with quite a bit of money that they have from industry, from couple big foundations. And it was all very secretive, but they did put out a call and said, anywhere in the world, come forward and tell us how you could contribute, where we play all together and really compare our approaches, our results, our concerns, so we can really accelerate that learning. And they expected to get 5, 10, maybe 15 proposals. And the reason is that this takes a big operation. You have to have the sites, you have to have the facilities and the tools and all the measuring that you need, and so on and so on. They got 91 from everywhere on the planet except Greenland. And so it was really, it spoke a lot to how many people are entering into this effort. And they'll probably, they are a big player, this group, and their funding, but I think they'll help accelerate this, so within the next 3 years, we'll be there. And maybe they'll have lost interest in the carbon markets, but I suspect not. It might evolve in how it looks, but I don't think they'll lose that interest.
Well, from one cynic to a genius, I will offer my pitiful insight. Get some PR people now, because when someone on the opposite side who's trying to still push fossil fuels or oils or compressed natural gases or whatever, someone who's going to push that, who says, I told you the Earth healed itself, it's part of a natural cycle, you need to get out ahead of that message, because, technically, it's a technology that Earth has been using since it probably came into existence.
Yes.
But, it's this alone. Well, let me ask you that. Do you think that this technology alone will save it? I mean, we talked about having to cut carbon emissions. I think that's an extension of this, which would sit those people, those talking point offerers, down in their chair and say, no, quit pumping carbon in. We're trying to fix what you broke.
Right.
But could this work in and of itself, or is there more work to be done?
So I think that what we need to do is all hands on deck. I think we have this very broad range of either already developed or developing approaches, including those machines that will literally suck CO2 out of the atmosphere, these big fans or big trays of lime that can do the chemical weathering, just sitting there in the atmosphere. They all take fossil fuels right now to get to the temperatures necessary to do or to power the machines, the big machines. That might change. And so, but even if they did, and then there are other approaches that are out there, and then all the green energy approaches. Together, collectively, yes, they could take care of probably 10 times what we produce, but we'll never get to the 10th of each of those to be, equal. I think we just need to have all hands on deck, and then time will tell, between how effective it is, profits, losses, popularity, and because there's the public. They're not keen on some of these things. They're nervous about it. But the one thing that we definitely need to do, and it's been real holding people up, is that a lot of environmentalists and academic and non-academic and political or not political see it as two sides of the coin. One is you have to go green energy only, stop burning fossil fuels. Well, realistically, that probably won't ever happen for lots of reasons. Even if we scale back, that's great. But we have all these others. All right, we can still take stuff out of the atmosphere to balance that. And even if we stopped burning fossil fuels today, we're not going to bring CO2 down to what we want it to be because, one, it's too high, so we've got to get rid of that legacy CO2. And two, we've got feedbacks in the system, the natural Earth system that is releasing methane, releasing CO2 to the atmosphere because we pushed it too far. We warmed the peats, we warmed the tundra too much, the wetlands. So it has to be all hands on deck for this to work. I did want to, there was something I wanted to mention because I had failed to remember this, but I was in Ireland for 3 different sabbaticals. And my last one there, they were feeding the cows both kelp, seaweed, but also they were letting them eat the grass on soils they had spread this rock. And you know what? In both cases, it reduced their methane releases.
Wow.
So there may be a connection even there. Yeah.
And I bet you the beef tasted better.
Who knows? Lots of iron probably, and yeah.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Nutrients.
Yeah, but I haven't seen anything more about that. But I do. I just triggered a memory when you mentioned Tessa.
Yeah.
All things on Earth are connected.
Right, and I think that's the takeaway. And I understand there's a mentality, and I absolutely appreciate the discipline that it takes to say all hands on deck, and we've got to put this fire out. We can figure out what the recipe is for sustaining success after we've achieved success.
Right.
I don't know. Surely you must see this, but it seems to me that in almost everything that keeps us alive, the food, clothing, shelter, the innovations that have come out in just a few past decades have been like an explosion, like a renaissance of realization of how we exist on this planet. And the insights that we've gained have informed the science. We're thinking about how we build houses now. For the first time, it's different than it was since houses existed. How do we take them off of an energy grid? Can we cistern the water and have a more reliable water source and things like that? Can we get our energy from the sun? All these things, the clothing that we manufacture is a lot more responsible, and it's a lot more responsive to our bodies in the atmosphere. So I just see this this knowledge. It's almost like coming at us faster than we can actually decode it.
Yeah.
And hopefully the end result is we stay alive a little bit to appreciate it.
Yeah. I think scientists we all know this for many, many decades. We need to communicate our science more effectively. We do, but I don't think we get it out there enough. And so people don't know, they're confused, or they heard this, heard that. But yeah, we need advocates, good advocates.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a really loaded question. Once upon a time, when the current administration decided to take shots at higher education, they aimed at a few red flags. Equity, diversity, inclusion. Climate change was one of the ones that they took a big shot at. Did you see any of that? Were you threatened by any of that posturing?
Oh, sure. But I do want to thank you. I thought you were going to ask me my age publicly. That was, but yes, I was. I was on Ted Cruz's list. That was a DEI. That was true. But I, sillily, there were others on that list who talked about biodiversity, and we're also on it for DEI when it had nothing to do with that. But I lost that money, and it's now back. But yes, we quite a bit of our funding is Department of Energy, and we were definitely told we could not communicate the words carbon or climate. And it was said by people who didn't believe that, but were actually helping us protect our funds and protect ourselves so we could keep going forward. I think that's dissipated. I think like a lot of things, It's kind of like squirrel. Oh, squirrel, move to this one. And I haven't heard any more since then. But funding's been cut too.
Well, we've heard a lot politically about this whole flood the zone mentality. Let's just throw anything that looks like a controversy at the world, and we'll keep it distracted or whatever. So hopefully that's what it is. That's kind of what this podcast is about. This podcast is an answer to that initial, salve, over the bow. We don't respond. We don't want to meet you on your own battlefield. We're never going to trade barbs with the president of the United States or even the federal government. What we can do is we can show evidence of the good things we do here. Right. And I think your work is, holy crap, like at that level that is almost beyond what we feel comfortable bragging about, because like we're talking about existential threats that you are working to sidestep. I don't know if anybody could thank you enough. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I actually want to take a second to say this would not be possible, truly not possible, without working with Professor Toby O'Gene in here on campus at LAWR, or Land, Air, and Water Resources. He's sort of the keeper of soil science data for the state of California, and an extension scientist as well. He really gets it and has been really patient with the basic scientist. And I think, like I said, it because it enables transdisciplinary research that really is not just interdisciplinary, but new thinking for both of us. It's been just an incredible ride, and hopefully so for the next decade.
Yeah, and I'm tripping over in my mind over his title of like he's the soil guy. We have to find a way to make that sexier, because people should be like, carrying you all around on their shoulders through town square and like, quick, it's the soil guy. Let's get his autograph. We need to align those mentalities, because I think people should appreciate the work that's being done by you and your colleagues across the world. So thank you again. Sincerest thanks to today's guest, Isabel Montanez. If you'd like to learn more about Isabel and her work, check out our YouTube page for links to her bio, books, articles, research, and more. And thank you for joining Minds Over Matters today. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe, share with your friends, and spread the word. We have a lot to say, and we guarantee something for everyone. Minds Over Matters is hosted by Ed Kiggins, produced by the College of Letters and Science at UC Davis, and recorded at the Larry Chandler Memorial Studio. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.